On Tuesday, April 7, President Trump wrote on Truth Social, and let's quote him here, "An entire civilization will be wiped out tonight and will never be restored." I don't want that to happen, but it will probably happen. That's the end of that strong statement. In a war where both sides continue to threaten each other on social media, this is one of the most serious. And if President Trump carries out what he said by destroying Iran's power plants and infrastructure, it will be the most powerful use of American military force since World War II and will greatly change the global order. This threat comes as time quickly ticks toward 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the deadline set by President Trump for Iran to come to an agreement and make peace. For its part, Iran also seems ready to respond in the same way. In a statement to the media, they promised to target American and allied infrastructure in the region with such force that they would be prevented from accessing Middle Eastern oil for many years. More importantly, according to the state-run Iran Times, Iran has cut off all diplomatic and direct channels of communication with Washington. As time passed, the whole world watched and waited to see what would happen. At 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, less than an hour and a half before the deadline, the president made a post on Truth Social that changed everything. He said that after talking with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shahbaz Sharif, and if Iran agreed to the complete, immediate, and safe reopening of the strait, he agreed to suspend bombing and attacks on Iran for 2 weeks. This would be a bilateral ceasefire that would give both sides of the war time to formally establish a peace agreement. For now, it seems that cooler heads have prevailed. Or have they? Because there is much to discuss about this ceasefire announcement, especially whether it will really last or not. But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. What we know and what we don't. First of all, let's talk about what we know regarding the ceasefire and the negotiations happening behind the scenes to end this war. And just a reminder, this is being recorded at 2:30. So if there are any major events after this, don't expect us to mention them. In his post on Truth Social, President Trump said that America has achieved and surpassed its military objectives and received a 10-point proposal from Iran, which they consider could serve as a basis for negotiations. He also said that almost all of the major issues between Iran and the U.S. have already been agreed upon in the initial negotiations. This is significant because Iran presented this achievement as a victory for Trump. According to the Supreme National Security Council, the country's highest security body, which claimed that the U.S. was forced to accept their 10-point plan and described the ceasefire as a long-term defeat for Washington. However, Abbas Saraghachi, the country's foreign minister, responded more calmly. He said in a statement that while Washington accepted the 10-point framework, Iran, on the other hand, is considering the 15-point proposal from the U.S. These two different proposals are at the center of the ongoing negotiations, and based on what is publicly known, they are very different from each other, with each proposal containing points that have previously been rejected by both sides. According to Axios, a U.S. official who saw the 10-point plan described it as maximalist, which in non-diplomatic terms means unrealistic and extremist. Al Jazeera reported that Iran also used the term maximalist to describe the 15-point American peace plan, calling it extremely unreasonable, deceptive, and confusing. So, what do these proposals contain, and what has changed for Washington and Iran to seriously consider them now? While the contents of these and what has changed now, this deal calls for Iran to dismantle its 3 main nuclear sites and halt any enrichment within the country. It also calls for suspending the ballistic missile program, reducing support for proxies, and fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz. In return, the nuclear-related sanctions against Iran will be lifted, and the U.S. will assist while monitoring the country's civilian nuclear program. Overall, this plan reflects the U.S. proposal that was discussed before the war began on February 28, when President Trump accused Iran of not negotiating in good faith. On the other hand, Iran's plan became public after it was shared by NA News, an outlet supported by Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Some of the provisions in the plan are that the U.S. must show commitment to non-aggression, and that Iran maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz, remove the sanctions against Iran and against foreign businesses that transact with it, and pay reparations to Iran for the damages suffered during the war. Most importantly, Iran's plan demands that Washington accept that Iran can enrich uranium for its nuclear program. And look, you don't need to be a genius at pattern recognition to see that there are some fundamental differences between these two perspectives. First, regarding the nuclear program, for Washington, the best-case scenario is for Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear program. In exchange, America would be open to allowing a civilian program that would be strictly monitored by Washington. For Iran, however, this would be a major violation of their sovereignty, which is one of the main reasons why Tehran has shown resistance to this conflict. Second, there is the issue of Iran's ballistic missile program. In Iran's 10-point plan, the missile program was not mentioned. While Washington previously indicated that it wanted to limit even slightly the number and range of Iran's missiles. Again, Iran likely sees this as an attack on their sovereignty and an attempt to reduce their ability to deter or fight back if the ceasefire or any future agreement is broken. And this is a real concern for Tehran because the US and Israel have previously attacked Iran in the middle of negotiations that Iran thought were going well. Furthermore, Iran also saw what happened in Gaza, where Israel repeatedly violated the ceasefire with Hamas, as proof that neither side can be trusted. And regarding Israel, Jerusalem's actions in Lebanon are another point of conflict between Washington and Tehran. In his statement about the ceasefire, Pakistan's Prime Minister Sharif said that Lebanon was included in the ceasefire. And this is what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, stating that Lebanon is not included in the ceasefire, where Israel's operations against Hezbollah continue. Even before the ceasefire was announced, the EDF issued a warning for the evacuation of residents in Tar and Shabriya. While the military was preparing for an attack against Hezbollah in the area, residents were ordered to evacuate north of the Al-Zarani River. However, according to Al-Azhar, Hezbollah announced that they would comply with the ceasefire, which further worsened the situation. According to the Jerusalem Post, even before the ceasefire was announced, the IDF's 98th Commando Division participated in ground operations in Lebanon. All of this shows that Israel has little interest in stopping their operations in Lebanon at present. For Iran, this is a major point of contention because they are clearly demanding a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon. For now, it is still unknown how Israel's ongoing operations in Lebanon will affect the situation. And finally, we also need to discuss Iran's demand for the withdrawal of American forces from the region. Although this is logical from Tehran's perspective, who would want their most arrogant enemy in their own backyard? For Washington, having troops in the region is important to ensure that Iran does not stray from the agreement. We also do not assume that the withdrawal of U.S. troops will be accepted in the Gulf states, as they still see them as part of their security guarantee despite recent events. However, even though there is a big difference between the two plans, both Tehran and Washington have firmly agreed to a ceasefire and are actively considering each other's proposals. The question now is, why? How did Washington change from calling Iran's plan maximalist and insufficient to now considering it as a possible basis for negotiation? And likewise, how did Iran change from calling Washington's plan unreasonable to now seriously considering it? pressure. To understand this, we need to consider the pressure felt by both sides. For Iran, President Trump's threats have proven to be credible, even though he sometimes backs down. So Tehran viewed President Trump's latest threat to destroy bridges and power plants and other Iranian infrastructure as a promise of what would happen if they did not negotiate. President Trump's threat is very serious. So, some observers and critics, including a former account connected to Kamala Harris's failed 2024 presidential bid, said that Trump is signaling the possible use of nuclear weapons. Especially after Vice President J.D. Vance said during his visit to Hungary that the U.S. has tools in its arsenal that it has not yet decided to use. While the White House quickly denied suspicions that Trump is considering the use of a nuclear strike, Vance's vague statements also highlighted the extent of the threat that Washington is ready to unleash against Tehran. Military pressure is not only coming from Washington, Tehran is also facing Israeli attacks targeting their transport infrastructure, including bridges and railways. Aside from the immediate military threat, Iran is also facing increasing economic pressure. Even before the war started, Iran's economy was already in a very bad state. This led to one of the largest public protests in the country's history. Mayard Maliki, senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former official at the Treasury Department, said, according to the former official, Iran is experiencing a severe liquidity crisis, with physical banknotes running out every day, and there are informal withdrawal caps of only $18 to $30 per day. The war has only accelerated this collapse. According to Fortune, prices continue to rise while demand for cash also increases because of the war. Inflation has soared, forcing the government to issue the largest denomination of currency in its history. The 10 million real note was equivalent to about $7.40. Meanwhile, analysts at Chatham House estimate that Iran's GDP will drop by 10% because of the war. In terms of economy and military, Iran is facing a situation that experts call FUBAR. We can explain what this means in the comments section. In addition, Tehran is also facing increasing diplomatic pressure from some of its closest allies. Pakistan, which has long-standing relations with both Washington and Tehran, has been working behind the scenes for several weeks to bring both sides to the negotiating table. According to Al Jazeera, Islamabad led a multinational effort that included the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt, who gathered in Islamabad on March 30th. The meeting resulted in a joint 5-point initiative calling for an immediate ceasefire and urgent diplomatic engagement, and the restoration of normal maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. Furthermore, China supported Pakistan's mediation efforts. On March 31, the Pakistani foreign minister visited Beijing to meet with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to Axios, this is where the 5-point proposal was formed. China's special Middle East envoy also traveled to the region as part of the mediation effort. Beijing stated that they consider the war as a structural shock to the world economy and insisted on the immediate cessation of military operations. As Iran's largest trading partner and the largest importer of Iranian oil, China has significant influence in Tehran. 2 Chinese officials told the Associated Press that Beijing maintained communication with Tehran throughout the negotiations. And the message was consistent: the war must end. For Washington, the pressure is different, but it is not any less. The economic cost of the war is rising. Oil prices are increasing, and the issue of inflation is worsening. But there is also a reality in diplomacy. If Washington rejects the Pakistan-China mediator proposal, it will give Beijing a major geopolitical victory, portraying them as responsible and trying to prevent further escalation. However, while Washington does not seem to be backing down, it also needs to consider the political calendar. The midterm elections are still far off, and the war has already become a political burden for President Trump's Republican Party. According to a survey by Emerson College, 47% of likely voters oppose U.S. military action in Iran, while only 40% support it. Trump's approval rating has dropped to 42%, while 51% disapprove of his performance. In the generic congressional ballot, the Democrats lead with 49% compared to the Republicans' 42%. Even Trump's base has shown concern. According to CNN, about 24% of those who voted for Trump in 2024 do not agree with his handling of Iran, and 15% are strongly opposed. Veteran Republican pollster Neon Newhouse warned that the coming November could be intense. Republicans who are still hoping to maintain their small House majority have privately admitted that the House is almost lost, and that Democrats also have a realistic chance of taking the Senate. The war's also causing divisions within the Republican coalition, where some influential conservatives have questioned whether the fight is for Israel or for America's interests. The prolonged war, with rising gas prices and no clear victory, has given Democrats a strong argument ahead of November. Aside from domestic calculations, Washington must also consider the threat of possible retaliation from Iran. Despite the efforts of America and Israel, Tehran has maintained its ability to attack U.S. allies in the region and affect global energy markets. Iran proved this when it attacked gas plants in Qatar, halting more than 3.5% of the world's LNG supplies in response to the Israeli attack on Iran's South Pars gas field. Any escalation by America could push Iran to the limit and cause a different kind of crisis. There's also the issue of perception. Trump built his political brand on showing strength and securing deals. But the war in Iran has lasted for more than 5 weeks with no clear end in sight. The threat that an entire civilization would die if Iran does not comply with his demands is so strong that it could weaken his credibility if he fails to follow through. At the same time, an actual attack would change the global order and would likely cause a widespread crisis. In all of this, it is clear that a ceasefire where both sides make compromises is the best possible outcome for everyone. Was it worth it? For the US and Israel, the answer depends on how success is measured. They have dealt a significant blow to Iran's military capability. According to Al Jazeera, hundreds of Iran's missile launchers were damaged, and some reports say that 80% of Iran's capacity to attack Israel has already been damaged. Iran's naval assets were also damaged, including fast attack craft, submarines, and mine-laying capabilities. The campaign also weakened Iran's air defenses, to the point that the U.S. was able to fly non-stealth B-1 bombers in Iranian airspace by mid-March. Washington and Jerusalem were also able to eliminate several Iranian leaders who had long been thorns in their side, including Ali Khamenei, the former Supreme Leader Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and Gholamreza Soleimani, the former commander of the paramilitary Basij forces. For Israel, the war also provided an opportunity to expand operations in Lebanon, which they plan to use to create a security zone along their northern border. On the other hand, Iran was able to attack America's allies in the region, targeting military bases, embassies, and energy infrastructure. These attacks raise questions about how well America can protect its regional partners and where the Gulf states might turn for security in the future. There's also the question about the Strait of Hormuz. Before the war began, the strait was open and hundreds of ships passed through it every year. The closure of the strait was intended to make the war more painful for the world economy, and Iran succeeded in doing that. More importantly, from Tehran's perspective, Iran now has the ability to charge tolls on ships passing through the strait, which could continue even after the war ends. According to Reuters, Iran could earn up to $120 billion a year until the oil and gas producing nations build pipelines to bypass the strait. Now, the strait has become so important to Tehran that Danny Citronovitz, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, said on Twitter that giving up control of it would be like surrendering their nuclear program or missile capabilities, something Tehran is willing to protect at any cost. More importantly, the regime in Tehran has survived despite the loss of Khamenei, Larijani, and other senior officials. The Islamic Republic appointed a new supreme leader, Mustafa Khamenei, the son of Ali Khamenei, and maintained their command structure. The system that Washington and Jerusalem expected to collapse remains intact. Finally, it is also necessary to discuss the human cost of the conflict because the number of deaths in Iran is extremely high. According to the US-based organization Human Rights Activists in Iran, 3,540 people have died since the war began. In Lebanon, authorities reported that 461 people have died from Israeli strikes since March 2nd. Across Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and other countries in the region, many others have died in attacks by Iran and related incidents. In Israel, around 30 people have died, including 10 soldiers in southern Lebanon. For Washington, 13 service members have died so far. So when it comes to the question of whether all of this is worth it, it really depends on whom you ask. For Washington and Jerusalem, some of their main military objectives have already been achieved, and it's likely that Iran will not pose a threat in the coming years. For Tehran, maintaining the regime and control over the strait is a major victory. However, for the people caught in the middle and for the economies affected by high gas prices, it's likely not the case. If Washington, Jerusalem, and Iran had negotiated honestly last February, the worst of all this could have been avoided. According to Bada bin Hamad al-Basadi, one of the main mediators at that time, in an interview with CBS, a peace deal was close and the world needed to give it enough space. Today's diplomacy makes one wonder how different the Middle East would look if the powerful had listened to al-Basadi's call to give diplomacy enough space. Despite this, we admit that the ceasefire offers a chance to end the conflict before the situation gets worse. How long it will last depends on whether all parties involved in the conflict will negotiate sincerely when the talks begin in Islamabad on Friday. If not, we can sadly say that the world is, to borrow a term, FUBAR,